at the age of 5, 6, my mother began to traffic me into a murderous pedophile network, which was run by the political and the business elite of Belgium. Children were brought into this network through pimps usually. Initially there was a pimp for me as well, and then my mother took over from that pimp. I was one of the what's called expendables. I didn't know that term, of course, but I knew that my life was worth absolutely nothing. At age 9, I was trafficked outside of the country and taken to different places, to Switzerland, France, and then to the United States. And one particular very well-known, very powerful man took a liking to me and then had me trained in Germany in what in the United States would be called MK Ultra, but it's that kind of program that was put into in Germany for a month, torture-based, to make me into a child sex slave, spy, killer. That was to be my journey.
Your mum, if you tell me about what your parents did for a living. Did you live just with mum and dad, or just mum? Were they divorced? Tell me what happened then.
Yeah, so I was born in Brussels, and my mother had had a one-night stand with my father. So she was alone with me in the first years, and I had a caretaker who was very loving. So my mother went to work. She was a secretary and at the radio and television station. So those first 3 years, I did receive a lot of love, and I was also being abused by my mother.
How?
Well, I've remembered things of my mother assaulting me during diaper changes in anger. And then what felt like laying in dirty diapers for way too long.
And did this caregiver that looked after you, you explained that you felt a sense of love from her. Did you feel a sense of love from your mum?
No, never. Never.
And did you feel that your mother hated you or didn't like you or anything like that?
No. I went with her story, which was, see, my mother said that she was a good mother, and we all had to, go with that story, and I had to go with that story too. It was just that I felt really horrible when I was with her, so there was no room for anything that was me. So I was a projection of the things that she didn't like about herself, which was either weak and bland feeling and just pleasing and groveling, or I was evil.
And so your mum was working at the radio station and she was a secretary. And how did she get exposed to these types of people? How did her interaction come with them?
She was married when I was 3 to my stepfather, and my stepfather also worked there. He was a cameraman, so they were pretty well to do, and he was 20 years older than her, so they moved into his house in the village where he was also the mayor in Flanders. And in that village, I'm not sure how it happened exactly, but I believe that my mother was targeted, or that I was targeted through my mother, that the people who were interested in bringing children to this network could see that my mother was not well. And there was a cleaning lady that came to work for us. I never liked her. She was extremely calculating. I just didn't like this person. She didn't like me either. So she and her husband became the first pimps. And there were people from the nobility in the village who were involved in the network. And that became the contact person when my mother took over.
The lady, the cleaning lady then, hold on, I've got to understand this bit about your stepfather then. So what role did your stepfather play in this?
So my stepfather was my mother's enabler. Because of his work, he would travel quite a bit, and he often wouldn't be there, sometimes even for months. So when he was gone, my mother just took me, and sometimes my little brother was in the car while she drove me to wherever she was told to bring me. And then when he was home, had a different cue. I had a different cue. So then she would just give me a look, and I would not put my pajamas on. I would just go to bed with my clothes. And then, she would come and get me sometime later in the night. And I would have to be very quiet. And she'd let the car roll down a driveway without turning the motor on. She'd turn the motor on at the bottom and then drive off. Now, my stepfather was in their bed, so it's not as if he wouldn't have noticed. But, well, they were both very good at denying and extreme denial. So my mother wouldn't acknowledge even physical marks or anything that I had, just that they didn't exist. Nothing existed. She was a good mother, and that was all. That was always the strongest reality for her that she needed to defend. So anything that was wrong with me reflected on her, and so she didn't accept it. My stepfather was similarly very deeply in denial. I had tried to speak to him once. My mother, I was 10 years old. My mother had left me for 5 days, which was an orgy, but then I was left by myself in this empty villa. And again, when she finally brought me home, she acted as if I should have known better. I should have come home or something, complete denial. And then my stepfather was home, and I thought he would know because I was emaciated. I had not had anything to eat. My hair was very knotty. I had not been able to clean myself. So I was sure that I would be able to speak to him. And I'd had this hope also when I was little for these years. Like, there was this thing, like, my stepfather, if he knows, he's going to help me. And so I tried to speak to him, and he was very disappointing. My mother apparently had already told him that I'd ran away and had spent some time with very rich people. And so he joked. He didn't notice, first of all, my condition. Then I tried to tell him. And when I tried to speak to him, he didn't believe me.
How did that make you feel?
My hopes were crushed. My hopes were crushed very much. My heart was broken so many times when I was a little girl. And my stepfather, strangely, I had less expectations from the main perpetrator. Maybe I had more expectations from him. And I felt more love from him too. My mother and my stepfather, I never felt any love. And even though I loved them, and I hoped they were what they pretended to be, I just really never experienced any love from them.
Did you go to school every day?
Well, I did go to school. I was absent quite a bit, but I did go to school, yes.
And did anyone at school ever hear you talk about it, or nothing at all?
I went with the denial of my mother. I wanted to believe that my mother was the good mother that she was, and I needed to believe that to live. And I would never have dared to speak to anyone because I was told that I was a prostitute. Not even that nice a word. So that's what I believed I was. So all the shame, and that's the purpose, I was carrying all this shame. And I think that's the purpose of the abuse, is to unload the shame that the perpetrators can't hold themselves, so they get into that cycle.
After you left, how often did you see your mother?
I saw her regularly. So when I went back there, first of all, she took me back to the network one last time for free. That I found out then that she was being paid because the men talked about it. And again, I survived, and that was the last time, then one time after my rescue. But in that time, because of the torture, I had these wounds, And so I had to be home for the wounds, and I was not in denial then, and that didn't match her reality. So it was very difficult to be around her. Then she molested me. And when she molested me, I gave up. I just, oh, the shame, the tremendous shame. I just let her be in charge again and went back into following her story. She's the good one. I'm the stupid one, whatever.
Everyone on this planet would forgive you for hating your mother. And nobody would be able to understand why a mother would do such a thing to their child.
Yeah, my mother was not really a mother, you see. There are women who are not capable of being mothers, and my mother was one of them. Just not. She was like a 5-year-old child, emotionally, and that clearly very abused. Born right before the war. Father went to concentration camp in a town right by Germany that suffered hunger. I mean, I don't know what happened to her, but clearly, and she lost her mother when she was 5 years old.
Did you ever forgive her?
I did. You know, when you see someone at their emotional age, it's much easier to forgive them. And she was 5 years old emotionally. So when you deal with people and you can see their emotional age, then you don't give them any power. So I'm still not completely healed from what my mother did to me. But she was not a mother. She wasn't able. She wasn't capable. So I did forgive her. I called to forgive her, in fact. And she died less than a year later.
I mean, again, right now, this minute, I don't get how anyone heals from that, but you've got a first-class honours degree in being able to do that, which I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for the fact that you are sitting here right now with a smile on your face and talking to me as coolly as you are. I just, that for me is I can't get my head around that right this minute. How did you start to heal? Where did the journey of healing begin for you? And was it with purpose? Was it by accident? Who did you meet that introduced you to certain ways, therapies, yoga, whatever it may be? Tell me a bit about that, please.
I first went to therapy. I knew I wanted to go to therapy. And I went and started, and that was the beginning of the journey. Not long after I started therapy, I started to get a new perspective on something that I brought in. And that perspective was very painful. It brought out all the pain. So I started this grieving process. I remember the first time, 3 weeks of crying, 3 weeks of tears. And while I was crying, I remember the change happening. So the neural integration is happening. So suddenly every cell is getting new information, and I see the world differently, and people respond to me differently, and I feel this growth, and that was tremendous for me. That was worth everything.
When you're trafficked at the age of 6 years old by your own mother to a pedophile ring as a sex slave, I thought previously on previous podcasts I'd heard the worst. I've never heard anything like that before. And I thank Anneke so much, genuinely so much, for being so kind as to share that story. It's truly heartbreaking. The reason I do this kind of stuff is that I want you to know that there's people out there that might be going through stuff that you're not going through tougher times than you're going through, and that when people like this have hope, you can have hope too.